Hi, so now I'll be demonstrating our project on software defined radio. We should first understand that this is mainly based on the approach of cognitive radio. So we have 10 channels here and 5 primary users. The primary users are History, National Geographic, Discovery, MTV and TNT. So primary users means that they have their own allocated bandwidth. So they are the owner of the bandwidth. So History is allocated channel 1 and 2, National Geographic has 3 and 4, Discovery has 5 and 6, MTV has 7 and 8, and TNT has 9 and 10. So these are the primary users. So let us now assume that initially only Discovery and TNT are transmitting in their own channels. So let us see what happens during the operation of cognitive radio or software defined network or software defined radio. So in the first condition, the primary user wants to transmit and the channel is free. So let us consider an example. National Geographic wants to transmit in its own band. So let us see what happens in the program. So when I run the program, it shows that Discovery and TNT are transmitting and all the other channels are empty. So let us say now that we want to start transmission. So it asks for the username who wants to transmit. So now National Geographic wants to transmit. So the username will be Nat Geo. It asks for the channels that the user wants to occupy. So now suppose we say that the National Geographic wants to occupy channel 8. So the program reminds that this user is allowed only channel 2 and 3 because this is a primary user and primary user has their own allocated bandwidth and it has to transmit in their own band. So now National Geographic say transmit in channel 2. So the National Geographic is now transmitting at channel 2 and the other bands are as shown here. So let us consider now the second case. Again, a primary user wants to transmit and the channel is in use by secondary user. So now the primary user can't just replace the secondary user, in which case the secondary user's transmission will be interrupted. So what it does is it waits for the certain time so that the secondary user shifts to the nearest vacant band. So now let us say the same thing. So let's say now the H2 News is a secondary user who is transmitting in a channel of that is owned by National Geographic. So let's say start transmission. So the username now is H2 News, who is a secondary user. So what channel does the H2 News want to occupy? So let's say he wants to occupy channel 3. Yes, so he is updated to channel 3 who is so H2 News is now transmitting in channel 3. So now let's say National Geographic wants to occupy that channel now. So start transmission again. Username will be Nat Geo and the channel is 3. So it waits for the certain time so that the H2 News is shifted to the nearest vacant band. So the nearest vacant band now is the lowest vacant band, with the lowest frequency. This is done because as the frequency reduces, it is easier for the vacant band. It is easier for the users to transmit. So H2 News is now shifted to channel 0 and Nat Geo has its own channels that it occupies. So let us now take the third case. Suppose a secondary transmitter wants to transmit and the channel is occupied. This can have again two cases. The channel can be occupied by a primary user or a secondary user. So what happens if a channel is occupied by a primary user and the secondary user wants to transmit there? So let's say now H2 News again. So H2 News wants to transmit now in channel 2. So let's say he wants to start transmission and the username is H2 News. So the channel wants to occupy channel 2, which is already being used by Nat Geo, and Nat Geo is the owner of that channel. So the program warns the user that he cannot occupy a channel being used by a primary user, so he is not given that channel. So now let us say H2 News wants to occupy in a secondary, in a channel that is being used by a secondary user. Say SMT News has occupied a channel. Okay, so SMT News is now a secondary transmitter and he wants to transmit in channel 0, which is being used by H2 News, who is also a secondary user, who is not licensed or not the owner of that channel. So the program tells that the channel is already occupied. Please enter a different channel. So this shows that the channel which is already occupied by a secondary user cannot be reused again. So the one secondary user cannot be pushed out of its already existing band. So now let's say he wants to occupy channel 1, which is vacant. So SMT News is now updated to channel 1. So that shows the third case of our program. So the last case, suppose a user wants to stop transmission. So what happens in that case? Let's say now Discovery wants to stop transmission, or in this case since we already have Nat Geo, let's use the same one. I'm sorry. Let's say we want to stop transmission. So the Nat Geo wants to stop its transmission. So as we can see in this program, Nat Geo is already occupied by 2 channels. So the user has to specify which of its channel does it wants to stop. So let's say I want to stop the transmission in channel 2. So again the program waits for some time. This is because the user has to let the receiver know that it is stopping the transmission. So once the receiver knows that it is stopping the transmission or it is shifting its band to some other vacant band, it can recalibrate itself to that frequency. So again, now this demonstrates the last condition. The code is already uploaded to this link, which can be found in the presentation. Thank you for watching.